Good morning. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, June 19th, 2025. I will now ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, June 12th, 2025, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, June 12, 2025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 4. The suggested minute associated with agenda item 6, agreeing to dismiss the complaint of Wisconsin Gas LLC against DeGroot Incorporated by joint execution of a consent agreement between the Commission and DeGroot Incorporated, and accepting the proposed consent agreement as drafted, which assesses a forfeiture against DeGroot of $4,500 and a $450 surcharge to the Diggers Hotline, and directs DeGroot's excavation crew to attend the educational course under WISSTAT Section 182.0175 sub 3 sub BR sub 4 and pay all fees associated therewith. The suggested minute associated with agenda item 7, declining to reopen the December 8, 2000 order and each associated utilities ID number, and directing Commission staff to address the removal of failed family meters and the 300-month test requirement in the Commission's open rulemaking on WIS Admin Code, Chapter PSC 134, or the suggested minute associated with agenda item 8, approving with all the conditions identified in the Commission memorandum, the joint application of WPL, WPSC, and MGE for a certificate of authority for construction of the Columbia Energy Storage Project at the proposed site, and granting the applicant's request to record the project in FERC account 390. Proposed condition 3 in the memorandum is modified to read: the applicants may record AFUDC on 100% of the quit balance adjusted for grant monies received during the construction of the project at a total estimated amount of $9.7 million.
I move we approve the notice of investigation associated with agenda item 2.
Second.
All in favor?
I move we approve the notices of proceeding associated with agenda items 3 and 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. In docket 9300 PLI 134, I move we approve the agreement to dismiss the complaint by joint execution of a consent agreement consistent with the Commission Secretary's description.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. In docket 5 GI 120, I move we direct Commission staff to address the removal of failed families of meters and the 300-month test requirement in the Commission's open rulemaking on WIS Admin Code, Chapter PSC 134.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. In docket 5 CE 156, I move we grant a certificate of authority for the Columbia Energy Storage Project consistent with the Commission Secretary's description.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That brings us to our first discussion item of the day, item number 5, which is docket 1 AC 257, the proposed revisions for Wisconsin Administrative Code, Chapter 1, PSC 113.0803 to be specific, for individual electric metering. So I'm not going to get into the history of this rule, PURPA, or 113 as a whole, because it's very clear from the comments that participants provided to us that they have a firm understanding of the topic and the proposed changes to the existing rule. So I will start with a reminder about the rulemaking process in Wisconsin and where we are right now and where we're going. So this is a multi-step administrative rulemaking process. We are still currently in the middle stages of the rulemaking. When the Commission took up this docket in February to keep the ball rolling, we approved the proposed changes as is and asked interested stakeholders to weigh in. Fortunate for us in our discussion today, they heeded our call. We received a significant amount of in-depth feedback via public comments. Commission staff compiled these comments received and put together a memo that summarizes the information and presents a number of decision items for us to consider. The outcome of the discussion and decisions made today will be reflected in additional modifications to the existing rule. The changes we make today will be incorporated into rule revisions in a final draft, which will be sent to the governor for his review and approval. If the rule is approved by the governor, it is then sent to the chief clerks of both houses of the legislature, where the rule will be referred to a standing committee. If there are no objections to the rule in the standing committee, after 30 days, it will go to the Joint Committee for Review of Administrative Rules, or JCRER. If 30 days passes there without an objection, the rule is then submitted to the Legislative Reference Bureau for publication in the Administrative Register. The rule would take effect on the first day of the first month after publication. If there is a legislative objection in the standing committee or in JCRER, the rule will be discussed, a hearing will be held, and the legislature has the opportunity to amend, approve, or deny the rule. So again, the takeaways here are we're in the middle of the process, and there are many subsequent steps that will occur before any final decisions are made. And two, I strongly encourage all of those people who passionately and substantively participated in the process thus far to stay involved when the rule goes through the legislative steps of the administrative rulemaking process. On that note, I would like to thank the organizations that participated in the public comment process. We really appreciate your responsiveness to the request for engagement we made when this was before us in February. We were hoping that you would use the public comment period to provide substantive, collaborative, and creative contributions to the record, and that's what many of you did. I'd especially like to thank the Clean Energy Advocates, a coalition made up of a number of groups, including Clean Wisconsin, Elevate, the Union of Concerned Scientists, Renew, the Wisconsin League of Conservation Voters, and the NAACP, to name a few, as well as the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition and the City of Madison. These stakeholders provided thoughtful analysis and demonstrated a willingness to find common ground. Another positive stakeholder engagement development here is the fact that while many commenters expressed a strong preference for repealing the rule in its entirety, they also presented thoughtful revisions that they could support. This realistic and flexible approach is helpful and conducive to our decision-making, and I hope to see more of it in future proceedings. I would also like to thank Commission staff for their probably years of work on this. We really appreciate the research, drafting, facilitation, and patience you've put forth thus far, and I promise there is a light at the end of this rulemaking tunnel. It's just kind of far off, but it's there. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the whys. So this rule was promulgated in 1980 and was last revised in 2002. It generally requires that multi-dwelling unit residential buildings have separate electric meters installed in each unit, with a few muddled exceptions and a convoluted waiver process. This rule revision is before us today because the PSC has received an increasing number of complicated waiver requests in recent years, which brought into sharp focus the need to rewrite this outdated, ambiguous, and obsolete rule. At the same time, we are now in the midst of an affordable housing crisis and a rapidly evolving energy landscape, challenges that highlight and exacerbate the underlying inflexibility, vagueness, and irrelevance of this rule as written. In fact, the existing rule has prevented us from granting meter waivers to well-conceived, sustainably designed, and often affordable housing projects, arguably raising costs, hindering development, and ignoring innovative energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions. The rule changes I will propose today are intended to combat these harmful results. Next, I'll talk a little bit about my goals and approach to the proposed changes. While the existing rule lacks flexibility and foresight, I am optimistic that we can revise it to better align with modern offerings to help address rather than hinder current challenges and to adapt to future advancements. My goals are to clean up, clarify, update, and improve this rule. This includes attempting to future-proof it to the extent that we can, injecting language that is technology and standard agnostic or neutral. We're just making up things at this point. With these goals in mind, the public comments received and information presented in the commission memo on the record, I think there is a path to improving and simplifying the rule through the expansion of exemptions to the individual meeting requirement, the utilization of existing standards and programs for clarity and flexibility, and a few cleanup edits that help streamline the existing rule. Shifting away from the waiver process through the expansion of additional exemptions is necessary for several reasons, including the waiver process is often confusing, time-consuming, and burdensome for everyone involved. Expanding the number of reasonable exemptions to the rule provides a more clear, concise, and unburdened path forward for building owners and developers. Expanded exemptions can be tied to existing standards and programs through flexible references that help future-proof the rule while providing increased consistency, certainty, and stability. This shift will also appropriately extract the PSC from getting stuck in negotiations between developers and utilities. If a proposed project qualifies for an exemption from this rule, they would not need to ask the PSC for a waiver from the individual meter requirement. In short, the expansion of exemptions tied to relevant standards and the cleanup of existing language results in a much improved revised rule that reflects modern times and is better positioned for the future. I look forward to walking through this with my colleagues, but first I will give them the opportunity to make any comments they have. Commissioner Nieto.
Thank you, Chair Strand. Thanks for your good opening remarks. As you described, this rule in its current language needs to be updated for a number of reasons, which are well described in our materials and in your opening remarks here. When we last discussed this item, I think we broadly agreed that we wanted to gain additional substantive, constructive comments from stakeholders and from the public. And I know that our staff did help flush some comments out and encourage commenters to bring substance to the wide-ranging alternatives. And so I will echo your thanks, in particular to the commenters you highlighted as well, and to our staff for facilitating those constructive comments. I won't be voting today to eliminate the individual meter requirements altogether in their entirety, as a number of comments have called for, nor will I vote to make them more stringent and less flexible than our challenging 1980s vintage rules, as some have suggested in changes. Energy conservation can be better achieved by the installation of today's more efficient technologies. However, I did have some changes and additions I'd make based on the specific wording suggestions and relevant evidence that we received. And I look forward to our discussion today and putting together a package here that resolves the issues with the current rule and brings it up to speed with modern technology. I do think, to some of the points that you made, Chair Strand, there are multiple ways we can approach this to reduce the number of waiver requests that we're receiving here, either through taking more of a categorical approach in the rule itself or through kind of a categorical review process solution, as some commenters put forth. I think it's a good idea to explore these with the goal of maximizing clarity and efficiency without creating unintended consequences. I will note I was frustrated to see some of the misleading discussion on consumer protections coming up again in our comments. We flagged those in our last discussion for folks to be cautious with and understand. So I will say, contrary to some of the material in the comments, number one, jointly metered units in our state are still covered by medical protections. And so utilities should not be disconnecting service where a medical condition, a medical emergency exists at all. They can still access energy efficiency benefits. They can access focus on energy programming, and in fact have one less barrier because there's a removal of a split incentive to confront in those cases. And in other sets of comments we received kind of on the other side of the issue, I will say submetering in order to resell to tenants is not allowed in the state of Wisconsin for electricity. And landlords are not allowed to cut off their tenants' electricity and disconnect in order to force payment of rent or any other sort of money owed. That's not consistent with the law in our state. So I would highlight, as the clean energy advocates correctly note, we already have joint metering in our state, and we always have. We don't have 100% individual metering currently and never have. So we already have requirements, protections, and programs set up for both joint metering and individual metering. And those requirements and protections and programs have been working since before the 1980s. So something as context to keep in mind. But with that, I'm looking forward to our discussion and hearing what you're both looking to propose.
Thank you. Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you both. I will just echo the thanks to those involved for helping to build out the information before us here. I haven't been around for the lengthy period of all of the waiver requests, but I've gotten a sense during my time on the commission of some of the struggles we've had with the lack of clarity in the existing rule, and so I have an appreciation for that. And so I share the goals that the chair outlined here. I'm interested to hear what you both think as far as how to revise them. I have some suggestions myself. I also really appreciate the consumer protection pieces that Commissioner Nieto just raised. I've learned that in a couple of the waiver requests that I've dealt with since being on the commission. So I was able to review the information here with that in mind, having learned from our past review of waiver requests. And just to highlight one thing that I think is my biggest goal in this proceeding is a lot of the discussion has been on the intent of having individual metering to help encourage conservation efforts, and that's been pointed to. And the way I've been seeing it is that it's doing the opposite in certain circumstances. And so Commissioner Nieto just mentioned the split incentive piece. And so if the owner of a multi-dwelling building actually is experiencing the costs of their equipment and their HVAC systems, they have the incentive to conserve. And it's not the tenant necessarily or the resident in that dwelling. So I have some suggestions for things that would help solve that really well understood conservation dilemma that is faced by a lot of multifamily and multi-dwelling units. So that's something that I was keeping front of mind in the suggested changes that I have to offer today. So I'll leave it there, looking forward to building something useful and helping move this forward.
I'm going to take us on a bit of a journey. Thank you. Well, I'm going to take us on a bit of a journey through our discussion. It will be a linear one, and I want to be as clear as possible about how this discussion will be structured. The memo and the alternatives presented in it do refer back to the proposed changes approved in February. It would be incredibly confusing and nonlinear to rely on those to guide our discussion because my approach to these rule revisions charts a different course that doesn't follow the same order or approach. Additionally, when we talk about subsections of 113.0803, I will be using the existing subsection numbers, even if we strike an entire subsection. I don't want to confuse the discussion with trying to renumber on the fly. OGC has confirmed that they can do that on the back end. So really, we need to focus on the substantive changes here. OGC will also add appropriate legal definitions to the language on the back end as needed, while incorporating the direction of our conversation to inform those definitions. So again, I don't want to bog down the substantive change discussion with those minor details and cleanups that can be fixed on the back end and need to follow drafters' convention anyway. Final draft will be available for our review before it is sent to the governor. In order to lessen confusion and have a productive discussion, I have prepared a handout that is divided into 3 sections. 1, proposed new exemptions, 2, proposed changes to the existing rule, and 3, other issues to discuss. So you will be receiving this handout momentarily, but I will tell you up front that it includes the specific language of the new exemptions, and where applicable, a red line of individual sections, subsections of the existing rule, highlighting the proposed changes there. I hope this handout is helpful, and I will again do my best to clearly explain each item and my reasoning for the proposed changes. Handout, please. Thank you. Okay, so to start our discussion, First, we're going to discuss the proposed new exemptions. Thank you to everyone for passing out the handout, by the way. I'm new to the handout situation, for a good reason.
Hold on, crew has something.
Oh, crew?
For
Sorry.
those following along at home or online, the handout is available on the commission calendar.
Thank you. Okay, starting from the top of side 1, page 1, proposed new exemptions. To paraphrase my opening remarks, this rule needs to be modernized to account for progress, advancements, and innovation within energy efficiency, conservation, technology, and building design sectors. The underlying issue, process, and rules should be more clear, more flexible, and less burdensome. Instead of expanding the waiver process and continuing to hinder much-needed development with unnecessary extra steps and bureaucratic red tape, and the whims of appointed commissioners, we should expand categorical exemptions to the individual meter waiver rule. Notably, multiple public comments recommended expanding exemptions, and some offered specific suggestions. It is important to note that the exemptions I'm proposing are separate and distinct from each other, and only one exemption needs to be satisfied in order for a multi-dwelling unit residential building to be exempt from individual meter requirements. They are an or, not an and. I will list the 4 proposed new exemptions and then turn it over to my colleagues for their thoughts on these. While the final drafting will again be left to OGC and the LRB, if approved, these exemptions would likely become additions to the rule language made under PSC 113.0803 sub 4, which reads, quote, "For the purpose of carrying out the provisions of," subsections that will be renumbered, "individual unit metering will not be required for multi-dwelling unit residential buildings that meet one or more of the following. 1, the electric equipment under tenant control meets established high-energy efficiency standards consistent with Focus on Energy, federal energy efficiency standards, or other equivalent energy efficiency standards or programs." This was discussed in item 4 of our memo, and it's helpful to identify established energy efficiency standards, but not define them too prescriptively as to avoid the problems we're currently facing with the existing obsolescence of the current rule. Striking this balance builds in some inherent flexibility to help future-proof parts of the rule. Creating an exemption for this, as opposed to an expanded waiver process, also means the PSC won't continue getting stuck in the middle of disputes between organizations, communities, developers, and utilities. Nor will our staff spend their valuable time analyzing building proposals and efficiency qualifications, which are not part of the PSC's core functions, and take them away from our other core responsibilities. I will turn this, you guys can decide. I can either go through all 4 and then you can talk, or you can talk after each one. You let me know what you prefer. I know you're taking it in on the fly.
Could we go through them all?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The second proposed exemption is overall electric usage under tenant control is minimal. To establish that overall electric usage under tenant control is minimal, the average electric energy use per unit is projected to be less than half of average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin based on the previous 5-year average of U.S. Energy Information Administration data, Wisconsin Energy Statistics, or similar state or federal government data. On-site renewables that offset usage shall be factored into the calculation to determine minimal usage. This item is discussed in item 5 of our memo. This exemption improves the existing rule because it provides clarity and certainty to organizations and developers. It offers a flexible and relatively future-proofed yet official definition of minimal usage to assist with the determination, and it acknowledges, encourages, and incentivizes the utilization of renewables in multifamily residential spaces. One of my greatest frustrations with the outdated nature of the current rule is this very apparent void as it relates to renewable technologies, installations, developments, et cetera. And so this is a way to acknowledge that those types of installations can offset usage, and again, to define what minimal usage looks like, which is lacking in the current rule. The third proposed exemption is that for new construction, the building design will meet high energy efficiency standards. To establish a building design meets high energy efficiency standards, developers and owners of construction projects must participate in the Focus on Energy Design Assistance Program or an equivalent program. Building design is another area where tremendous progress, advancements, and innovation has occurred since the rule's inception. Building design offers another example of how the current rule is too narrow and limited because it basically fails to address or account for this important component of energy efficiency. This exemption addresses that shortfall in a straightforward and consistent manner. One challenge with building design is timing. Certain designations and certifications are only bestowed upon completion of construction and/or successful commissioning of the building or verification of what was designed versus what was actually built. Here, we sought to link this building design exemption to a program or standard where this timing challenge would not be an issue. In studying the available options, feels like the Focus on Energy Design Assistance Program is a good fit. Program attributes include that it's locally administered, it's familiar, it's trusted, it's successful, it's relevant, the process is straightforward, and technical assistance is available. Timing would not be an issue here because of when that program would be initiated. The EDA, further, the EDA is required for developers and owners to receive WHEDA, the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority's low-income housing tax credit. So many of the developers seeking waivers or exemptions of the individual meter rule are already participating in the Energy Design Assistance Program. Including an equivalent program option that provides flexibility is another example of how a generally specific yet narrowly tailored program or standard can help this rule's relevance and applicability in the future. An alternative qualification option for those outside of a Focus on Energy service area is also available, which mirrors WHEDA requirements. The fourth proposed exemption is multi-dwelling unit residential buildings under contract with local, state, or federal affordable housing programs are exempt from this rule. First, this, or relatedly, kind of the exact language, was provided by comments that we received. And the current rule does provide zero opportunity or flexibility to consider organizations, developers, and others that undertake benevolent and well-intentioned projects. So this exemption will fix that. It reduces regulatory burden on much-needed affordable housing development across the state. And to further our goals of supporting low-income customers and to bolster projects with societal benefits, it is important for us to set clear exemption criteria for these types of projects. Absent this exemption, we risk standing in the way of progress on these critical initiatives, not to mention that these are the last projects we want to increase the cost of. So I will stop there. Those are the four proposed exemptions to this rule that I am offering, and I will turn it over to my colleagues to share their thoughts. Thank you.
So just for initial thoughts, I like the direction that your proposal is taking. I think for me, it would be helpful to look at the totality of the changes being proposed in your handout and then take a break to consider all of those in their totality and how everything is fitting together before coming to any motions or anything like that. But just for this first section that we're at, a general directionality, I appreciate the direction.
Thank you. Commissioner Hawkins?
I also appreciate the direction. I have a couple thoughts on it. First of all, I'm most excited to see number 4 in your list brought into the exemption instead of the waiver, so into subsection 4 instead of subsection 5 of the existing rule. So really happy to see that. On 1 and 2, I had in my handout, yet to be revealed, I have
Science is killing me.
Right. I have some suggestions of how that would look if it were to remain a waiver. And I was going to suggest that those two be joined together. And so I do think number 1 on its own is opening the door very wide. Almost every piece of equipment you can buy today meets a high efficiency standard. And so I think having 1 as a standalone item is really just open-ended and kind of does away with the individual metering requirement almost in its entirety. And so that concerned me a little bit, but I think the combination of 1 and 2, as shown here on the chair's handout, was in line with what I was going to recommend for how these originally appeared in our memo for subsection 5. And so I think moving those two together, I could very easily support because I really like that idea. And again, I think this references the right information, makes it less confusing as to how it can be supported. So I think providing that threshold of the half an average residential customer, in addition to making sure that all of the equipment under control meets efficient standards, and laying out some options there, I think is great. I'm unsure of 3. I think if you meet 1 and 2, you will also meet 3. And so I don't know if it needs to be a standalone thing. And also, and the chair, you mentioned the fact that you might not get those designations until after construction. So it could be hard to prove that to a utility that you're exempt ahead of time until you've gone through that process. So I have some questions on that one. I like the intent, but I think 1 and 2 would likely already get you 3, and so, and vice versa. So those are my initial thoughts.
As hesitant as I am to admit this, we were somewhat sharing a brain because I went back and forth for a long time about whether 1 and 2 should be linked rather than separate ORs. So I think we can, I think I'm open to discussing that. And again, I don't want to exclude Commissioner Nato from any of that discussion, but I definitely think that's something that we can continue to discuss after we take a break. I think I understand what you're saying about 3, but again, 3 is focused more on the actual design, not only. So 1 is really just kind of the equipment that's going in. So yes, that's part of probably the equipment and, you know, the appliances. 2, I fully understand how a very efficiently designed building could arguably lead to less usage, but I do think that those are 2 separate and distinct things. To the point about timing, I'm sorry that I was unclear about this. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm sorry that I was unclear about this, but tying it to other programs or specifications or certifications, like, I'm not going to list them because I don't want to confuse our conversation. That those are the programs that I chose not to link this requirement to, and that's why I chose the Focus Energy Design Assistance Program, because of the way that works and when this process is initiated. Those timing concerns from my reading of that would be alleviated because it's not something that is kind of designated after the fact. So as a building developer or owner, if you embark on that EDA program, in order to ensure that your building design meets those high energy efficiency standards, then you would be exempt from the meter waiver. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit. And I'm glad you're excited about 4, because I am too. And I'm back to Commissioner Nieto's point. I'll finish walking through the handout, and then you want to take a break then?
Yep, that'd be
Okay,
great.
perfect. Okay, so the real meat of what I proposed is in those new exemptions, but I do have a few changes to the existing rule, mostly that just kind of clean that up in acknowledgement of those exemptions, or like get rid of things that aren't necessary anymore because of the new exemptions. But definitely want to make sure that I'm talking through those with you. And again, the handout includes each change, and then where applicable, a red line of the existing rule, not the proposed from February, but the existing rule, and then what this specific change would be to that existing rule. So the first one is this typographical edit to PSC 113.0803 sub 1. Sorry, I'm going to say again too. These are going in order of current subsection, but the numbers may change post decision today. Okay, so the first one is that typographical edit. And you can see from the red line, it's just that striking of and making it an or. So I will just say that there are 2 typographical edits in the current rule that need to be addressed. They were teed up for us in the memo. This is the first of those. And this change is intended to clarify or correct language in the code, and it does not change any substantive elements of the rule. So literally, this is just like, it was identified as something to clean up. I propose cleaning it up. The second change is really no change, but I want to make sure that we're addressing subsection 2 to be clear. So this subsection applies to tenant spaces in commercial buildings, and I am not proposing changes to this language. So it would continue to exist and read, each tenant space in a commercial building constructed after March 1st, 1980 shall have installed a separate electric meter. So this is like a commercial tenant space, which is not, we're focused on this residential situation right now. Proposed change to the rule number 3 would strike PSC 113.0803 sub 3 from the rule. So I am proposing striking this subsection in its entirety, as you can see from the red line. The reason for this is, first, this subsection likely only applies to a small universe. So again, my interpretation of this is that buildings not individually metered from the outset, so schools, hotels, dorms, some of those older exemptions that exist in the beginning of this existing rule, and buildings that were constructed pre-1980 that are converted into a building with a different type of occupancy housing, is just not something that happens that frequently. But when it does, it is extremely burdensome and costly to add individual meters to an existing single meter building. And I feel that the benefits of requiring individual metering into a building like that are outweighed by these costs. We have had some similar waiver requests recently that kind of do actually fall into this scenario. I also feel that remodeling existing buildings, as conceived here, into what is typically affordable housing is good public policy on several fronts, because these adaptive reuses can quickly increase much-needed housing supply, it's less wasteful, it prevents blight, and it often revitalizes communities. So individual meter requirements and the waiver process should not stand in the way of this progress. And while some comments suggested explicitly exempting adaptive reuse buildings or existing buildings converted into transient dwellings, those exemptions actually are not necessary here if we just strike this entire subsection, because striking this subsection removes all references to individual meter requirements for existing buildings, which is why number 3 in my proposed exemptions says for new construction. We're just talking about new construction. All individual meter requirements for existing buildings would cease to exist in this rule if sub 3 is stricken in its entirety. And again, it's a limited universe, and when it does come into play, I think it does more harm than good. Okay. Proposed change number 4 makes typographical edits to the first line of PSC 113.0803 sub 4 and strikes PSC 113.0803 sub 4 sub C. So the first language here in the handout just shows what those changes would look like, red line, to the existing rule. I do propose striking 4C because it's unclear, confusing, and unnecessary. Further, given the broad yet carefully crafted exemptions discussed earlier in items 1 through 4, makes, in my opinion, 4C no longer necessary. I think we've seen a lot of confusion and, again, just lack of clarity and either over-reliance or under-reliance on this 4C, and I think a cleaner way to deal with what we think may be conceived in this subsection is, include similar things in the exemptions and just strike this. The typographical edit will likely change the numbering within this, but again, I'm just keeping it here to affirm our support of updating it accordingly and ensuring that legal feels that they have the authority from us on the back end to undertake those cleanups and truing up of the numbers. The 5th proposed change is an edit to PSC 113.0803 sub 5. This proposed change would edit subsection 5 by striking the 3rd and 4th sentences of the subsection. So given the new this is the waiver subsection. So given the new exemptions, I don't foresee, if they were to be approved, as we've discussed today, I don't foresee much of any, or if any, situations where an entity would need to seek a waiver to the rule from the PSC, but I do feel, never say never, it's probably prudent to at least preserve this option going forward. However, the last 2 sentences in 5, so it's starting with in cases involving, are where a lot of the issues that we get into right now in it are kind of initiated, or the genesis of them. And, I believe that these 2 sentences should be struck because the creation of new exemptions, if that's the path that we go down, would no longer be necessary, because the exemptions would codify kind of these broader, more clearly articulated specifically exemption 1 and 2, would codify these in more broader, kind of clearly articulated and applicable to relevant standards, rather than this kind of murky electric equipment, vague kind of reference to some of these things. So again, if exemptions 1 and 2 that we discussed, even as an and, are approved, then these 2 sentences in 5C are absolutely unnecessary and should be gone. There's one other issue to address on my, one other issue I want to address that's not on the handout, but I'll just say it out loud because Commissioner Nieto made some excellent points about consumer protection up front. So I don't want to stay silent on that. So consumer protection language was included in the proposed rule, and our public comments did include some consumer protection suggestions. While I am very supportive of consumer protections in all items that come before the commission, I do think that we likely lack the authority to address those issues in this rule, and it is likely unnecessary because these protections, to Commissioner Nieto's point, already exist elsewhere in state statute and code. So just very quick examples of this, which again, Commissioner Nieto articulated very well. For us, the definition of a public utility in Chapter 196 already disallows the resale of electricity. So restating that again here would be unnecessarily duplicative. Additionally, landlord-tenant relationships are governed by Chapters 704 and 799 of the Wisconsin statutes, and DAT-CAP rules 134 and 137, sections of the administrative code. Another outcome of our potential shift away from waivers and tort exemptions, as proposed in my handout, is that the PSC is removed as a referee or arbiter between developers and utilities. So this also means that we would no longer have a vehicle like an order approving a waiver request where we could condition our approval on consumer protections and kind of police that behavior. So for those reasons, I did not include consumer protection language in my proposed additions and changes to the existing rule, but not because they're not important, because of those reasons. So that concludes my discussion of these proposed changes. If there are specific questions that need to be addressed now to help your consideration during the break, I can try to do that. Otherwise, we will take a 15, 20, you guys tell me, 15-minute break, and then we will reconvene around 11:30. Oh, yes.
And is everyone comfortable with the information that we have shared among the commissioners at this point? Or would we want to provide any additional information before we take our break, just to avoid multiple breaks?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yep, same. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are back from our break. We left off in our discussion of the handout I provided regarding proposed new exemptions and changes to the existing rules. So I believe our next step is to hear from Commissioner Nieto and then Commissioner Hawkins on the proposed changes. So we'll start there. Commissioner Nieto.
Thank you. So I would accept essentially what you're laying out in this handout with a few minor comments here. Looking back at the discussion you both had about combining 1 and 2, I would combine those as well. I think in their substantive kind of complete version, whatever that exact drafting looks like. I would keep 2 on the new building, especially in light of it being prefaced by the 1 or more and having some nexus with other parts of the rule. And was fine with 4 as well. Chair Strand, to your point as well on not having sub 6 included in this draft, I was on the exact same page for the same reasons, not necessary, and that's already part of the law. And the only other change I would make here, in addition to the combination, would be to add a note connecting the defined terms on the CBRFs to Chapter 50 of the statutes. And notes are pretty easy to add and remove without rulemaking, so I would add a note saying community-based residential facilities and residential care apartment complexes have the same meaning as provided in Section 50.01 stats. To some of our comments on those being defined terms and our future ability to be able to link those. Other than that, I would accept this draft. Thank you.
You. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you both. Upon discussion, I think I'd have just like one more tweak to get me on board with everything that has just been discussed. I'll just say, I was originally, as I said, gonna propose updated exemptions, and I was really worried about how that would still get us back to where we're at today. And I meant waivers, updated waivers, and there was no really clean way to do that. So I'm really happy with the direction this is going. My point here on the combined 1 and 2 is I think we can eliminate the first sentence and the first clause of the second sentence.
Can you read it,
In
please?
number 2, yes,
Just read it
sorry.
out
So
loud.
in
Thank
the
you.
exemption, number 2, and I'll just give some background here. We've had a lot of discussions in the waiver requests of like the philosophical debate of what is under tenant control. And that isn't important when you're talking about what is metered at a residential unit. That's all that matters. What's under control or not under control doesn't matter. And so if you eliminate overall electric usage under tenant control is minimal, delete that. To establish overall electric usage under tenant control is minimal, delete that. And the requirement is that the average metered electric energy use per unit is projected to be less than half of the average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin. And so you're setting that bar as, if there were an individual meter, what would the projected measurement be? That's what we care about. We don't care about defining what minimal is or anything like that. So if we just make that a requirement for the exemption, it simplifies things and it gets rid of any potential hiccup between a developer and a utility of like, is this under your control or not, resident? It's what would your meter, if you had an individual meter, measure? And that's all that really matters. So that was spelled out in my now useless handout. I had something similar to that. So I'm proposing that in the modified 1 and 2 combo.
Okay, so for clarification purposes, I'm going to read what I think your modified 1 and 2 combo would read, and then we can go from there. Okay? Okay.
Sounds good.
The electric equipment under tenant control meets established high energy efficiency standards consistent with focus on energy, federal energy efficiency standards, or other equivalent energy efficiency standards or programs. And the average electric energy use per unit is projected to be less than half of average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin, based on the previous 5-year average of U.S. EIA data, Wisconsin energy statistics, or similar state or federal government data. On-site renewables that offset usage shall be considered. Well, how do you want to treat that, since we're kind of moving away from
Yes.
usage calculations, but also kind of not?
Yes. I had one suggestion for that, was just that, like, on-site energy technologies that offset usage shall be factored into the calculation, because geothermal reduces your use, shading, thick walls,
Yep.
things like that. So I think just on-site energy technologies is more inclusive of a bunch of different things.
Should we say like energy technologies offsetting, like, is
Yeah.
the point that they offset
Yes.
usage?
Yep.
Okay.
So I think the way that it was is that offset usage shall be factored into calculation to determine, and instead of minimal usage, just projected usage. Because that's what this is. It's a
Right.
projection. So it would be
Or-
on-site energy technologies that offset usage shall be factored into the calculation to determine projected usage per unit, or whatever that is. Whatever it says earlier. Per unit projected usage, yeah.
Or just usage, right?
Or you,
Yeah. Yep. Well, no, because we
He
want
doesn't
that to
want
go into the.
usage- yeah.
It still has to be factored into the 50% piece.
less, yeah,
So
less
it
than
ha-
half?
Yeah, exactly, less than half, yes, per unit projected
Because you
usage.
want to maintain that as the standard. But
Yes.
not, because, yes, but that's your point, not like the minimal usage point.
Correct.
Under tenant control minimal usage point.
Correct.
Okay, so let's just, one more time. So, okay, and to back up, so again, these exemptions would fall, how it would read is, for the purpose of carrying out the provisions of sub 1 and whatever, individual unit metering will not be required for a multi-dwelling unit residential building that meets, and then that would be changed, because 1 and 2 is a combo, right? Because right now it just is one or more of the following, so it's good.
Which is still fine.
Yeah, kind of, but
Yeah.
we'll let them clean that up in case it's in conflict. So one or more of the following, the electric equipment under tenant control meets established, so one would say the same, and the average electric energy usage is projected to be less than half of average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin, based on the previous 5-year average of U.S. Energy Information Administration data, Wisconsin energy statistics, or similar state or federal government data. On-site energy technologies that offset usage shall be factored in, what if we say, shall be factored into eligibility determination, or like applicability of this exemption or something like that? Because isn't it the point that if it's there, we want it considered, and we know that that would help quantify usage and whether or not that usage is under that threshold, but also the point of all of 1 and 2 combined is, if you can prove this, you're exempt from the individual meter requirement? Maybe? I don't know. Commissioner Nieto, what are your thoughts on Commissioner Hawkins' proposed modifications to 1 and 2?
I'm good with removing the extra references to tenant control minimal. And I think whatever we come up with for the end of that sentence can kind of be massaged to be, to your point earlier, the best drafting for the rule. But I think we're all on the same page as to what we're trying to say with what the offset means and where it gets us.
What about, could it be something like on-site technologies that offset usage shall be factored or shall be considered in the determination, or in the, something regarding the projected use, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Like tie it back to like the specific projected use standard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Shall be incorporated into the projected use
Yeah.
calculation.
Yes.
So,
Oh, yeah.
Shall
I
be
think that's what-
incorporated.
Incorporated
Yeah.
into the
I think that's-
projected usage per unit?
On-site technologies that offset usage shall
factor
be,
does work too, I guess.
or factor, shall be factored into the
Calculated.
average projected usage calculation or,
Yes.
or usage projection, something like that.
Yeah, that works too. Shall be factored into the usage projection.
That's a little different than what, can I read what you
Yeah.
said, Marcus? So, and then, so we have one, and the average metered electric energy use per unit is projected to be ... On-site energy technologies that offset usage shall be factored into the calculation to determine projected usage per unit.
I think that's a little wordy.
That is a little
Clunky.
wordy, and one thing that now that I think about it is problematic is a couple things. So what we're talking about is if there's a master metered technology that's offsetting the master meter's usage, it already would be accounted for in the per unit usage. So like we've had examples with centralized HVAC, the residents are not getting billed for that. That's coming through their rent. And so we have this offsetting there, but their per unit would already reflect that because they wouldn't be getting billed for that.
That.
Yeah, and so, so I think striking that per unit parse and just the usage calculation somewhere in the mix of this analysis of a building is what matters.
But don't we have to watch out a little bit for the, like, if we're thinking of the waiver applications that we've received, I'm a building owner and I'm looking ahead at installing solar. And we have the EIA data about what the usage is, and then we have like the projections of what it's going to be. But we don't have that like metered offset yet.
I guess, I see what we're talking about now. You mean, like, if it's not part of the original design, it comes later? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think she's saying specifically to your point about that it wouldn't be, that the offset would already be captured in that central metered usage, that she's saying that prior to the installation where that offset would be captured, how do we account for the offset from that technology if it's not installed yet, right?
Exactly. We're like, just making sure that our wording allows for a projected offset.
Right.
Or for
Yeah.
the after the fact, whatever the exact wording is, which is where I think we're all at anyways.
Yes, yes. that's-
So on-site energy technologies that offset overall usage shall be factored into usage projections or something like that, or projections. I mean, I think we're there. I think we just need to, like, especially to Commissioner Nietzsche's point, make sure that the wording does not conceive of things that'll very likely happen. But again, I think I just want to add, I went back and forth on how to include the offset component, because I think I said this out loud, like the void of any acknowledgement and calculation of that in the current rule is one of my biggest issues with it. But I think you both are raising good points about how is that tied back to the standard? When is it calculated? Because again, if the calculation's happening and the calculation is the means to the exemption,
Yeah.
but the installation hasn't occurred, and so it's not technically factored at that time.
Yep.
Like, again, maybe we go then to number 3, and the building design will
Yeah,
help
yeah,
you
that's-
get
that
there.
could be
Maybe,
helpful,
since
yeah.
that's an or, right? I don't know. I'm trying to think
Right,
through
and
how, go ahead.
Oh, sorry,
No,
no,
no.
and the 3, I'm thinking of kind of these, 3 is for the new building design, more of, an existing fourplex that is looking to install rooftop solar, that offset's going to be pretty significant and wants to shift to individual metering along with like a remodel that's going on, just making sure that we're using that word projected or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
That we're not somehow, or just usage if that's,
What if we just
Already
say,
contemplated.
sorry, this is a little wordy. What if we just say on-site energy technologies that offset overall usage shall be factored into usage projections? And like,
Yep,
then it's not, the timing thing I think is probably okay.
yep.
But we're still accounting for the fact that those installations will help you get to the
Yes,
exemption.
you can't ignore
right?
them.
Yes,
Yep,
exactly.
That's all that
That's
matters.
Are you guys
That's
okay with
exactly
that?
it.
Okay,
Yep.
do you want to read it out loud?
That's clear, if you want it, again, for
Sure.
everyone's benefit.
So I believe how we landed for the last sentence in the new exemption, which is 1 and 2 combined, is that on-site energy technologies that offset overall usage, we could also say will offset if we want to go future, but either way, on-site energy technologies that offset overall usage shall be factored into projections.
Perfect.
that works.
I had usage projections.
I'm okay with that too.
Even better.
Yep.
Okay.
Usage shall be factored into usage projections. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, good talk. You guys good on that one?
Yes.
I think you're good. Yes. So do you have other comments or modifications to make to the handout?
I just had one more comment that I wanted to say out loud.
Sure.
That doesn't change anything. But it was related to the handout number 3. Striking that from the rule, I think is really important as it brings us much more in line with a lot of our neighboring states. And so that was something that frustrated me in seeing what was available. And I was really happy to see all that brought into the record, like what is the normal out there in the Midwest. And so striking that, I think, gets us much closer to what we see in our neighboring states. So I just wanted to give my appreciation for that suggestion, because I think that's overdue.
I'm glad we can help with your neighbor estate envy.
Yes.
We can,
Frequent problem.
yes, yes. Okay. Anything else on the handout that you guys would like to discuss?
I'm good on the handout.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it's probably goes without saying, but I'm also comfortable with combining 1 and 2, since Commissioner Nacho specifically stated her position on that. Thank you.
Read number 1 and 2.
Yes, so I'm going to read the new combined exemption that we just created again in its entirety, just to make sure that it is clear what we captured. I'm not going to read the lead-in, though, because we know where we are. Okay. The electric equipment under tenant control meets established high energy efficiency standards consistent with focus on energy, federal energy efficiency standards, or other equivalent energy efficiency standards or programs. The average electric energy use per unit is projected to be less than half of average monthly residential use per customer in Wisconsin, based on the previous 5-year average of U.S. Energy Information Administration data, Wisconsin Energy Statistics, or similar state or federal government data. On-site energy technologies that offset overall usage shall be factored into usage projections. Okay. So just to recap, where we are, because I think we're close to wrapping this item up, we have agreement on combined exemption 1, handout exemption, the number 3, the exemption number 3 from the handout, and exemption number 4 from the handout. The proposed changes to sub 1, sub 3, there's 2 changes in sub 4 and sub 5. And the note that Commissioner Nieto offered regarding, I don't want to say it wrong, so the other statutory definitions, to make sure that there's a consistent kind of reference back to those things?
Yep.
Okay. You're okay with that?
Definitely.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to double check that the people who actually have to capture what we're doing here have what they need before we move to the motion stage.
Yeah, you covered my last remaining question, so.
Oh, good. Okay. Do you guys have anything else that you want to add on this topic?
Nope.
thank you for, I think this is exciting. I mean, we've all grappled with this rule for a while, so we'll see what happens, since once we let it go, it's a little bit more out of our control, but I think I'm excited that we have consensus on some things that will really improve where we are right now. So I believe that means we are ready for a motion.
All right. I'll just give an overall motion as opposed to piece by piece.
Yes, the only thing I want to ask is if you are comfortable, if you would like this to come back, or if you are comfortable with it being drafted based on today's discussion.
I'm comfortable based on the clarity of today's discussion, if my colleagues are as well.
Yeah.
Would anybody like it back?
We're gonna see it before it goes to the governor anyway, so obviously if things are. Well, I said it out loud, so that means it's happening. Sure. If it's not going to slow down the process, because we are up against some statutory deadlines. Yep, okay. We will see the red line. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. In 1 AC 257, I move we approve the proposed rules and legislative report consistent with our discussion, and would ask to see a copy of the rules before they move forward.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. We have one more agenda item for discussion. It is item 9, docket 5780 TE 111, the application of Sturgeon Bay Utilities for approval of revisions to its parallel generation tariff. So a couple things that I want to note up front here. So one, Commissioner Nieto is recused from this item. This is the second time that Commissioner Hawkins and I are taking up this docket because the record was reopened to gather additional information needed to inform our decision-making. So I do want to thank the applicant for their work subsequent to the docket reopening, because their participation here did help address many of the concerns raised earlier in the proceeding. I also want to thank our commission staff and Renew for their hard work developing this record and their thoughtful and substantive analysis of a highly technical manner. Commissioner Hawkins is going to lead our discussion of the decision matrix today. Thank you for that. But before I turn it over to him, I'm not going to relitigate our past discussion, nor do I feel the need to defend the decision to reopen the docket, but I do have a few opening comments to make. So as I've said many times on various issues, it is important for the commission to make thoughtful and deliberative decisions based on thorough and complete records. One reason that is especially important in cases like this is because the wholesale provider here, WPPI, serves dozens of Wisconsin municipal electric utilities that often employ an imitation or replication approach, which results in numerous WPPI utilities offering similar programs and rate designs. Under this approach, a new program or rate design is initiated by one WPPI utility, and upon commission approval, additional WPPI utilities submit applications for similar programs and rate designs. Recent examples of this trend are new load market pricing and 3-tier time of use tariffs. Based on that, and the applicant's request in this proceeding to delegate authority for future buyback tariff decisions to the DERA administrator, I do expect a similar pattern will unfold with parallel generation tariffs, where over time, additional municipal utilities will seek commission approval for similar rate design. I want to be clear that I do not have a problem with that approach, and my comments here should not be misconstrued as criticism of the process. Rather, my point is that strong, clear, evidence-based decisions based on complete, thorough, and fully analyzed records of evidence are especially imperative in cases like these, given they are often replicated by other utilities in future proceedings. Further, rushing to a decision based on incomplete information may result in unintended consequences and could have adverse impacts on utilities and/or their customers. So to the extent that we can take our time and get it right, or as close to right as we can the first time, we should. With that being said, given the additional information gathered through the reopening, I am now supportive of the applicant's proposed rate design. In the first iteration of this proceeding, I found the record thin on a few fronts, but was primarily concerned with the lack of evidence supporting the assertion that the wholesale provider's avoided costs are and should be the avoided cost of the utility as well. I was not convinced that the legal analysis and basis alone was sufficient justification to accept the proposed rate design. Because there was no accounting for the actual transaction of excess generation of the customer-owned generation facilities, it was unclear to me that the applicant's proposed rates were a just and reasonable quantification of avoided costs. However, I believe the record of evidence now sufficiently demonstrates that the wholesale provider's avoided costs are a reasonable representation of the avoided cost rates of the applicant. I largely arrived at this conclusion based on the commitments articulated in the reopening part of the proceeding, where an applicant witness testified that WPPI will in fact purchase surplus power from the applicant's non-legacy customer-owned generation facilities on a going forward basis. Regarding this specific comment and the treatment of non-legacy customer-owned resources, I do want to clarify that once legacy customers transition to the new buyback rates, WPPI's commitment to purchase that power should apply to those customers as well. In other words, it's my expectation that the commitment applies to all customers subject to the new buyback rates. Further on this topic, because we don't regulate WPPI, I will offer now that in issue 9 of our DM, I'm going to put forth a condition for approval that is intended to ensure a transparent process is in place for demonstrating this commitment to purchase surplus generation on a going forward basis. Again, I want to thank Commissioner Hawkins for leading our discussion today, and I'm going to turn it over to him for opening comments and to walk through the issues in our decision matrix.
Thank you, Chair Strand. I'll skip past some of the background on this docket. I thought you captured the history well. It's been open since 2019, the reopening since late last year. And I can just say, just as an opening comment, that the record is definitely adequate for us to make our decisions here today. And I want to thank the applicant and Renew for further responding to data requests and providing additional information that I agree was helpful in coming to some clarity here. As a reminder of what is before us today, Sturgeon Bay is a municipally owned electric utility that serves approximately 9,800 customers. The utility is a member of the wholesale customer of Whippy Energy and does not own any of its generation facilities. Instead, it purchases power and power delivery services from WPPI. Although technically not a party to the proceeding, WPPI did submit this application on behalf of Sturgeon Bay, and Whippy staff provided testimony in support of the application, both in the original and reopening proceeding. What we're talking about here today are 2 of Sturgeon Bay's tariffs related to parallel generation, the PGS-1 and PGS-2 tariffs, we will dive into each of those individually through our decision matrix. And let's see here. What is being asked by the applicant is a proposal to modify their buyback rates and seeks to have them reflect WPPI's avoided costs as determined primarily by MISO energy market prices. And I believe, let's see here, I don't really need to go through that. There were 6 issues that we included or requested additional information on in the reopening order. All of them were responded to, and I don't need to list them out here, but I just want to thank again everyone for responding to those 6. I thought they were helpful. Let's see. So we'll be walking through the decision matrix. It has 9 items in total. Issue 8 is uncontested, so we will not be discussing that one. And I will note now that when we get to the discussion of issue 7A, which is new, it is related to issue 5B, so I'll be taking those up together.
Thank you.
Yep. And I'll provide my perspective on each of them before handing it back to Chair Strand for her to do the same. And before we dive in, I'll say similarly to what the chair just said, that I'm on board with most of what the applicant has requested here. I have some additional clarifications that might be needed to help clean up what is going to be in these final tariffs, just because things have changed over the past 6 years since when this was first requested. So I just want to make sure that the final tariff structure is in line with how things operate in the year 2025. So I have some of those cleanup items to include, primarily related to seasonal capacity prices, which are now the norm in MISO. So by using WPPI's avoided costs, we just need to make sure we're in line with those. All right, so issue 1 is to determine if the change for the PGS-1 tariff is just and reasonable. The applicant proposed to the buyback rate for excess generation here to be the 3-year average of the MISO day-ahead locational marginal price. split between on and off-peak hours. Again, well, not again, this program is a monthly net metering program, so this buyback rate only applies if there's excess generation at the end of a month. Since the last time we discussed this, we've gotten further explanation from the applicant and explained the difference between the PGS1 and PGS2 tariff schedules. And let me move down here to my decision. I included as part of the reopening order a request on if these calculations for the buyback rate could also be done on a seasonal basis. I think that is important, and the applicant was open to that. So calculating the average LMP prices by season on and off peak would be the final buyback for this PGS1. So I'm at alternative 2, which is approve the proposal to change buyback rate for excess generation under Schedule PGS1 with modifications. The modifications be to have the day-ahead LMP averages vary by season. And let's see. Yeah, and that's it for all 2.
Thank you. So I can join you at 2. I think overall I didn't find any unjustness or unreasonableness in alt 1, but I know that seasonality was something that you were specifically interested in incorporating into this, especially because of the changes that have occurred on that front since the inception of this application. And I think that is an appropriate thing to do. I mean, in general, I get a little concerned about overly complex designs because of the fact that they could lead to billing errors, challenges for our staff's verification of accuracy, and customer confusion. But again, I don't think what you are seeking is overly problematic. And I do think it is a more modern calculation, or incorporates more modern calculations that are reflected, in that, at that regional transmission level as well. So I will join you at L2 for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. The second issue is to determine what the appropriate period to require legacy treatment of currently enrolled customers is. The applicant proposed that current PGS1 customers have a legacy period that runs through December 31, 2029, and essentially backdating the start of that period to be a 10-year period from when they first applied for this change at the commission back in 2019, when a notice of those proposed changes was first issued. Both Renew and commission staff had concerns about the reasonableness of using 2019 as the starting point for a 10-year legacy period. I share those concerns, and so I was at Alt 2, approve to end legacy treatment for currently enrolled PGS1 customers 10 years after a final order is issued. And I'll turn it to Chair Strand.
I am in the exact same place. So Alt 2 and a 10-year legacy period, which would begin on the date of the issuance of the final decision in this docket.
Sounds much better
Yes.
than the way I said
No,
it.
and it's very consistent with previous commission decisions regarding updates to parallel generation buyback rates, which I also think is important here. So lockstep. Thank you.
Awesome. Moving on, issue 3 examines the applicant's proposal to change the system size restriction for Schedule PGS2 to a 5 megawatt cap. The applicant states that this upper restriction of 5 megawatts for the schedule aligns with FERC rules and explains that through its wholesale provider, WPPI Energy, the applicant has obtained a federal waiver of PURPA obligation to purchase from small power production QFs with capacities greater than 5 megawatts. So for this one, I am at Alt 1 and approve the proposal to use that system size restriction.
Same. I mean, this was basically uncontested. As close to the uncontested issue in 8 as we could get, but Alt 1, thank you.
Great. Issue 4 considers the applicant's proposal to continue using WPPI's avoided cost as the basis for its PGS2 avoided cost rates. This was one of the major issues of the docket, and there were a lot of different opinions as to what appropriate approach would be for determining the just and reasonable cost. The applicant asserted that the avoided costs that WPPI faces are synonymous with the avoided costs that the applicant faces, whereas Renew disagreed and Alternative suggested a different approach. Those were further discussed in the reopening, and additional clarity was provided there. let's see, we directed the applicant to provide a more complete examination of alternative avoided cost calculations and methods, including how various components of the base cost of power calculation or U factor could be considered as part of the avoided cost calculation. And it's important to note, upon reopening, the applicant testified that Whitby has committed, as the chair mentioned, to purchasing surplus power from its member utilities, non-legacy customer-owned generation sources on a going forward basis. So that was key, and so I believe, I may have already heard what the chair's position is here, but I'm at Alt 1 and find that it's appropriate to set avoided cost rates at the applicant avoided cost rates.
Same. Thank you for your discussion of that and for reiterating things that were important. I
Awesome.
appreciate that.
So let me scroll past all of the lovely legal summaries that I had here for that one. Issue 5. This walks through all 3 of the components of the proposed rate and asks whether WPPI's avoided energy capacity and transmission costs are just and reasonable. And for me, there was a couple different applicant testimonies that were really instructive here that proved out to me why WPPI's wholesale energy cost adjustment is the appropriate place and what sort of problems could arise if it were not used as the reference. And so I want to, let's see here, talk about, we'll go with, I just want to set up here for before our discussion that the PGS2 tariff has 2 subcomponents. There's a behind-the-meter rate and a front-of-the-meter rate. And there was nice tables provided in the record that show the differences there. The behind-the-meter rate uses hourly netting and an avoided capacity cost buyback at the 3-year average of MISO's planning resource auction. And that would be, in the way I'm thinking about this, the same as the avoided energy buyback rate for the PGS1 tariff, so seasonal and on-peak and off-peak. And then front of the meter has no netting. Energy is using the LMP averages, similar to the other 2, PGS behind the meter and PGS1. And the applicant proposed 50% of cost of new entry set at the time of contract for a 10-year contract. I'm going to propose a change to that item, and I will get into that when we get to 5B. The first issue we discuss is 5A, which examines the proposal for calculating avoided energy costs. They, again, are proposing a 3-year average of historical LMPs that are provided publicly and available by MISO, and those would be separated into on and off-peak hours, and I would, like I said, want that to be seasonal. And let's see here. Oh, I just want to thank, I guess, the applicant and staff for working through trying to make this more in line with other IOUs that use projected LMP values. I'm totally fine with the historic approach and appreciate the complexities that were raised and issues and confidentiality concerns of using other sources. So there was a lot of back and forth on that in the reopening proceeding, and I am comfortable sticking with the historical. So I am at Alt 2 on this one, as I discussed with those tweaks to seasonal.
Thank you. I can join you in Alt 2, especially because our position here would be similar to the position we took in issue 1 regarding PGS 1. So that works. Thank you.
All right, moving on to 5B, we are considering the method of calculating avoided capacity costs. The applicant proposed, as I said, different approaches for behind-the-meter and front-of-the-meter customers. For the behind-the-meter resources, the capacity payment would be set at a 3-year average of MISO's annual planning resource auction clearing prices. But the front-of-the-meter resources would be a reference to cost of new entry. And let's see here. The applicant also proposed using a 100% cost of new entry so long as the end customers enter into a 20-year contract. I'll explain my position shortly on that. And so this issue is closely related to issue 7 and 7A. Issue 7 considers the reasonableness of the contract options for the front of the meter part of PGS2, and issue 7A is related to an early termination penalty for a potential 20-year contract that during the reopening proceeding the applicant put forward. So I will just say upfront that I do not think a 20-year contract with this penalty provision is reasonable. Based on the record, I instead recommend using 100% net cone by the accreditation value for the 10-year contract period. So for the front of the meter part of the PGS2 capacity value, I am proposing using 100% net cone, and the record didn't specify net cone. That, again, is probably a timing issue. In the year 2019, MISO made cone values known. Now they calculate net cone, which is a lower value that reflects offsets from energy market sales and revenues. And so while the record clearly references MISO's cone calculations, I just want to be very clear that it is a net cone calculation, and referring to it as just cone is and it's vague and not necessarily what the value will be that they're looking to at MISO. So because that net cone value is lower than just a cone value, which was asked for in 2019 when the applicant first filed, I think that's one reason why it's just and reasonable to use a 100% net cone value. Another reason is that it is anticipated that the accreditation values for solar will continue to go down in the future. And so using a 50% net cone value and then on top of that derating it a further step based on accreditation didn't seem reasonable and wasn't really justified for why the applicant was proposing to do that. It did not seem to make any sense to me. So for all of these, it puts me at Alt 3 for issue 5B and Alt 2 for issue 7 and 4 for issue 7A. And so I can jump around each of those, but to start for 5B, Alt 3, sorry.
Yeah, I can join you at Alt 3 for 5B, and I'm comfortable with the methodology that you articulated.
Okay, yes, it is Alt 3 for 5B.
Yeah.
All right. And let's see here. One thing that I do also want to make clear as to why I'm suggesting the 100% net cone instead of the 50% net cone, the way the applicant has it today, and the way it was argued for in the application was that the front of the meter value is locked into a contract and has more value than the behind the meter capacity value of a PGS2 resource that is offset by a customer's load and is less predictable by the utility. The front of the meter is directly sold to the utility and is more predictable. And if the 50% net cone is used, it is likely and probable in the near future that it would actually be worth less than the behind the meter capacity value. And so it would be the exact opposite of what was intended by the applicant if we do not use that 100% net cone. The clearing prices in the MISO PRA have been very high the past 3 years, and so behind the meter PGS2 resources would be getting more value in that scenario than front of the meter. And so that is another reason for why I'm suggesting the 100% net cone for the 10-year capacity contract for front of the meter. I think that was the only thing I wanted to add on to what I said already. Okay, so we're good. You're good with that?
Or 5B,
5.
net cone for front of meter 10 year.
Perfect.
Yep.
We'll go into 5C then, and just I'll recap when we get to 7. No, we'll get back to it. We'll circle back. It's in, okay, we're not going to circle back because we have it laid out. So issue 7, which is related. I'm supportive of the 10-year contract with 5-year extensions and other aspects of that contract using the 100%, as we said. So this is alternative 2, approve the applicant to offer front-of-the-meter customer contracts as modified by the commission, as I was just discussing. So that is where I'm at on that related issue 7.
Thank you. I'm actually in the exact same place on issue 7. So I think we're good.
Cool.
Thank you.
And then 7A is related to what would be an early termination penalty if a 20-year contract option was pursued. I am at alternative 4, take no action, because I do not think a 20-year contract is appropriate.
Exact same position.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, then we are now circling back to 5C, which is the avoided transmission cost component of the buyback rate. And the approach that the applicant put forward is consistent with what most of our IOUs have put into their parallel generation tariffs. And basically, it's a transmission cost placeholder. There was arguments that we could develop something, and I'm sure this has been in all the other dockets as well, that isn't present in this record here. So I'm at Alt 1, approve the applicant's proposed avoided transmission cost credit.
Alt 1, thank you.
6, considers the reasonableness of both front-of-the-meter resources and behind-the-meter resources under the same PGS2 schedule. Renew was against including both of these and argued that there was some confusion potentially of the two types of resources within the same tariff. Staff took no position. I could sympathize with that, but I thought it's fine keeping it the way it was as well. So I'm interested to hear what the chair thinks. And yeah, broadly, I'm okay either way here, but Alt 1 was my slight preference.
Quote, comfortable with either option. Curious to hear what Commissioner Hawkins has to say. But I did have alternative 1 as my preferred, slightly more preferred over alternative 2. So I can absolutely join you there. Thank you.
All right, we've tipped it over the edge to Alt 1 there. We'll keep it in the same tariff. Issue 8 is our next issue since we've already discussed 7. It was uncontested, so I will move along to issue 9. And the last issue requests authority be delegated to Division Administrator of DARA for future similar applications. I believe the chair, it was in a similar place in her opening comments. I was at Alt 2, do not delegate to the Division Administrator of DARA.
Thank you. I'm on alternative 2 also. I don't, given just everything you've talked about, and the novelties and complexities embedded in this docket, I just don't think we're ready for delegating authority on these yet. I did, if it's okay with you, I said in my opening comments that I was going to propose an additional condition here to ensure that transparent process in place for the commitment to purchase. So I'm gonna, if it's okay for, similar to the theme of the day, I'm gonna read my proposed condition out loud. It's a little long, so I apologize in advance for the lengthiness. Just so everyone is privy to what I'm thinking, and then we can talk about it from there. Okay. So this would be an additional requirement that specifically would direct Sturgeon Bay to file an annual compliance filing. The filing shall be due 1 year from the issuance of our decision in this docket, and each subsequent year until their next rate case. The filing shall demonstrate accounting of the buyback transaction consistent with the commitments made in the record here. And I would delegate to the division administrator authority to review the compliance filing specifically. Through this process, the DARA administrator will have the authority to extend the compliance requirement if needed. Otherwise, the compliance review would basically, this requirement would sunset at the conclusion of Sturgeon Bay's next rate case. Again, with the administrator having the authority to extend that if necessary. Upon review of the compliance filing, if it's determined that the applicant is not in compliance with the commitment stated in the record, then I would require the DARA administrator to elevate that compliance filing to commit to us for further investigation of that lack of compliance. Additionally, I would direct Sturgeon Bay to work with our staff on the timing and the date to file the updated tariffs and the supporting information to include in the tariff update filing. And to work with the staff to establish the date when the new buyback rates in each subsequent year would become effective. So I don't feel strongly that that needs to be a January 1st effective date. I think, given a lot of different factors, including what pre-January 1st workload looks like for our staff, should be considered, and that we can have some flexibility in coming to a consensus on the appropriate date for that. And then I would authorize, the authorization to update rates and tariffs shall be granted so long as the rates and tariffs are consistent with our decision in this docket. So just to summarize the kind of the why for this condition is that, again, as I stated, my process in getting here, and it sounds like yours as well, was partially predicated on the commission's finding that the evidence and the commitments of the applicant and WPPI are sufficient and reasonable to approve the buyback rate tariff changes. And that, looking forward, we're not prejudging any future applications that may come, but that doesn't mean that what was approved or what was quantified here or in compliance filings are applicable to all these other utilities. Similar to what you and I talk about a lot with uniqueness of project sites, there are uniquenesses inherent in each utility that I think would need to be reflected in any future proceeding. So again, I think, we're taking a reasonable and measured approach to ensure that these specific buyback rates are appropriately set and that there is a workable and consistent process for updating those before we're delegating authority away from us for future applications from other utilities. So that's, again, the condition is focused on ensuring that we have evidence that what they said was going to happen is actually happening up to or past next rate case filing. And then just includes, components as it relates to that specific condition and the compliance filing. Let me know if you would like me to restate or reread any of those elements.
I don't believe I need anything restated. That all tracked for me and I think is appropriate. It did spark a question for me related to something else that I might not have clarified that I want to circle back to briefly, but I can support the compliance filing approach and the delegation to the DA for review of that compliance and the sunset provision that you explained. I think that that's all fine by me. I did have one question. I spent a lot of time talking about the front of the meter capacity value and kind of breezed by the behind the meter. Yeah. And this is something where the application just spoke to the MISO PRA as it existed in 2019. It is now a seasonal auction. And so this is another place where the annual updates to the buyback rates need to reflect the seasonal capacity prices and not just PRA. It's not a single thing. So that's another area that needs to be cleaned up for the final tariff. And I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Yep, so that's part of kind of our decision in 5B we discussed specifically FTM and where we were on that. And
Yep.
then you're also, your expectation is also that the behind the meter calculation includes that seasonal component.
Absolutely.
Consistent with what we decided on front of the meter and QGS 1.
Yes.
Got it.
Yep.
Totally fine with that.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess this is what I check with legal to see if they have everything that they need.
Just one question, confirm 5C for me, avoided transmission cost. You were at,
Approve.
we were both at
We were both at
proposed.
O1.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. That's,
Okay.
that's it for me.
So I move to approve modifications to Sturgeon Bay Utilities parallel generation tariffs consistent with our discussion here today.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Those recused? Did
Aye.
I say? Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, it's 12:27, but that does conclude our official business for today. Thank you, everyone, for your rapt attention and your great discussion to these important items. Our next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, June 26, 2025 at 10:30 a.m. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we stand adjourned until Thursday, June 26, 2025 at 10:30 a.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned.